Hello, everyone! If you couldn't tell by what is written on the whiteboard, we are going to be discussing US imperialism in the Virgin Islands. Now, the US didn't do much there until a couple of decades ago, so to waste time, let's rewind to not 1992, not 1892, not 1792, not 1692, but, that's right, you guessed it, 1592! Just kidding, we're going to 1492, where explorer Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Interesting fact time, the islands were named the Virgins by Columbus in reference to the legendary beauty St. Ursula and her 11,000 virgins. After that, as we all know, the Native American population plummeted, and they no longer exist in the islands. Tragic. Moving on. Fast forward to 100 years later, to the early 1600s, and countries like the Netherlands, France, and Denmark stopped colonies. Denmark was extremely successful, actually. The Danish West India Company had a lot of land for a while, and even took part in the slave trade. Now, if we fast forward to the 1800s, the US began to show interest in the islands, especially with the great success that Danes had. Attempts from different political figures such as William Seward and John Hay were made to purchase the islands, but the Danish were like, no. Now, when the 1900s came and World War I broke out, the US was afraid the Germans would annex Denmark, thus making the Virgin Islands a base for the Germans. The government then bought the Virgin Islands in 1917, and since then things have been smooth sailing. The government of the Virgin Islands is organized under the Organic Act of the Virgin Islands, passed by the U.S. Congress in 1936 and amended in 1954. The government has the same three branches as our country. There are three political parties: the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and the Independent Citizens Movement. The District Court of the Virgin Islands operates under federal law and functions as a U.S. District Court. The Superior Court is the court of first instance for many civil and criminal matters. Its decisions may be appealed to the Supreme Court of the Virgin Islands, and, if necessary, taken for further review by a U.S. Appellate Court, and ultimately by the U.S. Supreme Court. In the mid-1900s, the Virgin Islands saw more prosperous times. Tourism began to boom during these times, and the Virgin Islands are still considered some of the best vacation spots. Hotels, restaurants, and shops began popping up on beachfront properties and in main towns. Rising business and economy led to an increase in the population as immigrants from neighboring islands flocked to the Virgin Islands for work. Today, the population of the U.S. Virgin Islands are made up of people from all over the Caribbean. The islands entered the new millennium as one of the premier destinations for tourists visiting the Caribbean.